everyone, welcome back. Hope you have had a lovely little break. I got myself a cup of tea because I had a craving for a hot drink, so I'm just going to have a little sip. We are getting into our final themed session. It is accelerating decarbonisation. And you probably already know that transport is responsible for about a quarter of global carbon emissions. So we're going to look at this from the perspective, get my teeth in, that the problem is also the solution. What we mean and how we count carbon emissions is a complicated and quite technical landscape. So we are going to have a crucial scene setter to help clarify what we want to focus our energies on. To that end, I'd like to introduce Kim McCann and Amy Marshall from PA Consulting to help set the scene. Kim is an energy transition partner, and Amy is co-lead partner for clean and smart mobility. So please welcome Kim and Amy to the lectern. And do you have slides that you're going through?
We do. Yes,
we can bring
them ourselves.
Great. Do you want to do it from here? And then you can look up and see your slides from this lectern. Yeah?
Yeah, we'll do it from...
Oh, you do it from sitting down?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
We're just going to stand. We want to move around.
Whatever you need.
Right. Mm-hmm. So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming along later in the afternoon. My name's Kim McCann. I'm one of the partners, as I said, in the energy transition team in PA. And I focus on all of the hardest to decarbonise industries and transport sectors. So that generally means everywhere where an electron is not the solution to getting away from fossils, where you still need the energy density of a molecule, which then tends to mean everything that flies and everything that floats. But why do I have the right to be standing up here today talking about that? Well, I started off my career in the mid-90s. Really, as an engineer, really helping companies understand how to use new technologies to really unlock value in business. And in those days, value really meant efficiency. This was in the days before we had the word sustainability, and really it was about maximising efficiency. But over the years, that efficiency use of resources, be it human or physical, really evolved into sustainability. And the bulk of my career, around 13, 14 years, was with Shell, Royal Dutch Shell. So really that was all then about the energy transition. If you're looking at new technologies, you're really looking at the new energy vectors, what's the future of. And the last 5 years of that, I was operational excellence globally for Shell Aviation. So ran about 154 airport fuelling operations, including at Manchester, across about 34 countries. So as far back as 2015, I was defining down what is the zero emissions aviation future. What's a zero emissions airport? Not net zero, but actual zero emissions. How can you have the bitumen that when the aircraft go over it generate electricity that actually then powers the terminal? All of these sort of aspects, and that's what got me into sustainable fuels, SAF, many of you will have heard of, sustainable aviation fuels, and hydrogen. So that's the areas that I'll focus on today. And Amy and I are doing a double act because Amy's the other half of the energy transition for transport.
We do this quite a lot. And, Kim is floating things and flying things, and I'm generally things on wheels, but definitely things on the ground. So where it's not molecules, it's electrons. I'm the electron person is the other way to think about it. So again, I'm another of the energy transition and clean and smart mobility partners at PA, about 15 years in industry. My kind of angles, and you'll start to hear some of these themes come through in the next 15 minutes or so, are around a couple of things. So firstly, I started in this game because I think that technology can fundamentally make the energy system and transport systems not only lower carbon, but also more efficient. So the efficiency piece is something that we're going to explore today. And then secondly, I cut my teeth in smart metering. That was my kind of entry point. And that is all about how we as consumers, how businesses as consumers, how users at the end of any system can both participate in and fundamentally affect a faster transition to net zero. So I come at a lot of this from what does it mean for the user, what does it mean for changes in user behaviour, and how can we use those levers to help us along the decarbonisation journey. So transport, biggest emitting sector in the UK. So we're starting from a pretty challenging place. I think the interesting thing about that is if we'd been standing here 20 years ago or so, energy would be up there. But as we've talked about in terms of the energy transition, we have, as a nation, done a very good job of getting ourselves from where we were to where we are. Energy sector is now about 20% of UK emissions, and that is 74% down from a carbon perspective specifically on 1990 levels. So the good news is, decarbonising transport is super complicated, but as a nation, we have been here before, and there are lessons to be learned, I think, and parallels to be drawn, some of which we'll start to talk about in a few moments. I think that the final kind of framing point before we kind of get into implications for the transport sector is, I think something that Kim and I have been talking about that we're very conscious of in our day jobs as well, is that this sector is absolutely fundamental and mission critical to UK PLC. So everything that we all do in this room is about moving goods and people, and they're the two things that fuel the economy. So when we think about helping businesses decarbonise, we always come at it from a perspective of you have to do that in a way that doesn't affect the economy and affect the mission criticality of the transport, the kind of transport functions of those businesses. So, let's make sure we bear that in mind as we go through the journey, I guess. I'm going to draw a quick parallel with the energy sector as well. So, how did the energy sector get from, get 74% down over the last 30 years? So, firstly, it's a complete fundamental redesign of the entire energy system. So, not a small task. And that's everything from reconsidering from a fundamental level the way we generate. So, moving from an oil and gas-based generation capability to something which is multimodal, to coin a phrase, and multi-technology. Many of those technologies which are now kind of well understood and very well embedded in our energy system, like solar, like wind, etc., we kind of forget that it was only 30 years ago those things were a blueprint, they were a nice idea, they were kind of something that I think was very hard for people to imagine being really well embedded in our economy and our system. So there was a lot of technical change. Also, huge amount of reform, role change, regulatory change to enable that shift to happen. And right down to making sure that the right roles existed to digitize the system to manage movements of energy, which went from being very kind of top-down and dumb to being very distributed and very flexible. So huge amount of digital enablement, again, which we'll touch on again in a moment. So I think, and then the third point, being consumer engagement. The other good news for the transport sector is that if we look back 30 years in energy, kind of carbon literacy wasn't really a thing, and I don't think people were as aware as we see across big swathes of the public awareness today. Awareness of the impacts that our individual actions about what we buy, how we power our homes, how we transport ourselves, how we fuel our businesses. That carbon literacy wasn't there. So as we, as a sector, go through decarbonising transport, we have the advantage of the fact that is not only something that people understand, but it's also something that businesses value and something that consumers demand at the end of the day, which creates a huge pull. So I think that's just to draw some parallels between where we've gone with energy and where we're heading with transport. A couple of just themes there would be there is no single winning model, there is no single winning technology, and there are different modes of consumption that we need to take into account, and we should expect as we move forward that the entire sector, soup to nuts, is going to be disrupted by the decarbonisation challenge. Good news is there are a couple of levers that we can pull today. So Kim?
So, big, scary, revolutionary change. That often when you're in transport, where there is no such thing as a smooth day in a transport operation, hands up anyone who's ever had a day that went to plan anywhere in transport, it doesn't happen. When you're running an operation day to day, how can you start revolutionising the world? How can you do that? Well, the key thing is you don't. Really, these first couple of bits will go into what you can do here and now while running your operations as it is, and that is you optimise before you revolutionise. You start through optimisation. I said earlier I was operational excellence at Shell. I started my career with optimisation, Six Sigma, Lean. That was all about money and efficiency. Switch the money for CO2. What you measure, you change. So every operational excellence programme, and I know everyone in this room through any bit of the transport network will have operational excellence programmes, give the CO2 footprint equal weighting to the cost. It's very easy to value it. You can look at the future value of CO2, and we heard about resilience earlier, the value of not changing and what that's going to mean for disruption in your operations as climate change really starts to take a hold and take an impact. So really take your day-to-day continuous improvement programs, your 7 wastes, your lean programs, and focus them all on CO2 just as much as cost. You fix the CO2 and actually the cost will come because the solution ends up to be the same. The second aspect is going back to one of the main themes throughout the conference. It's that really integrated systems thinking, multimodal integrated system. We're doing a lot of that in the UK. In fact, I've seen the stand in the centre of the room next door with associated British ports, MAG on it, rail on it, Heathrow South Rail, and I thought, my job here is done. They're already integrated. They're already working together in every bit of infrastructure programme. Hopefully that is what's happening. I, honest to goodness, used to be able to commute from Glasgow to The Hague faster than I could commute from Glasgow to London. The flight's about the same time. It's the fact that when you come out at Schiphol, you're on the train straight away and the trains are timed to hit when they know the computer trains are hitting. That is integration. That's real integration. Similarly, some of my aviation colleagues might not be as happy about it, but in France, they're putting in regulation that if you can get a train there, you're not flying and you're just not allowed to because they're thinking about what is right for the nation, what is the right way to move, and actually their trains don't take that much longer because they invested in the infrastructure to enable it. So if you think holistically around some of that, then maybe some of the decisions we've seen in the recent past that I shall not mention in case I get struck down by lightning, maybe wouldn't have been made. So that's the first 2 areas that I would say. Your operational excellence, your bread and butter stuff, just switch the focus and switch the lens. And that integrated thinking, do not do an infrastructure project unless you've got every mode round that table, please, and think about it in that sense. Now, the next thing that we could go on to here that we believe is a really undervalued lever, and a lot of overused buzzwords, to be honest, which is why it's undervalued, is the twin transition. Now, that's not our phrase. Ursula von der Leyen was one of the first to coin that phrase, the twin transition. And really what that's about is how can you harness digital transformation to really accelerate the energy transition. That's what that really means. How do the two things come together? Now that comes down to 3 things, the things that we've already mentioned. It comes down to user or transport, your customer centricity. It comes down to that really integrated nature, and it comes down to optimization. And everyone can think about the technology first, and that's where people often do. We also have tools that start with things like AI. For example, in the optimization space, we have a tool called Talcos, built with IBM, where it's really looking at the through life service of an aircraft. And an engineering team, MRO, maintenance, repair and overhaul team for aircraft, will make on average 200 decisions in a year about what they're doing on that aircraft. Decision Brain uses proper AI to make 6 billion decisions in a minute. And with that, we're taking millions, literally millions, out of airlines' MRO budgets. Now that's great. Everyone can start with the technology. People shout blockchain at you for anything that you want a solution for. And it very rarely is the solution. But the fact is, if you're a CIO sitting there with a blank sheet of paper, how do you even get started? Where does it come from? It doesn't start from the technology. And this is where the World Economic Forum came to us, and PA, with the World Economic Forum and Schiphol Airport, the CIO at Schiphol Airport, we developed a really, really simple playbook, which is a really baby step decision making through with tools, templates on what meetings you have. And you can do it in 7 days. The idea being if the world was made in 7 days, we can make a CIO's digital transformation platform in 7 days. But really the 7-day version gets you to know what questions you have to answer. To do it properly takes about 12 weeks. But at least then you've really got a plan that means the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer, and the CIO have got an integrated plan. And once again, it's like the operational excellence, rather than what is on your digital transformation roadmap being all about cost reduction, it's as equally, if not more, about the CO2 reduction and the decarbonisation of your transport as much as it is actually about the cost, and doing both at the same time. So you can see here, we've tried this out with a few people. Those QR codes at the side are letting you see we've got examples there of where it's been done at Schiphol, where it's been done at ports as well. We've done it with Gavin Laidlaw, the CIO of McKinney Muller Maersk Terminals, APMT Terminals, and we've also done it outside of transport. We've done it with Heineken in the FMCG sector, and the next one going up next month is with ABN AMRO, so even the banks can do it too. So if the bankers can do it, transport can definitely do it. So then it does get on. That's your next 2 years of job mapped out. That's what you can do in the immediate term without changing an electron or a molecule anywhere. But then it does get to the big, slightly scary infrastructure required, proper energy transition stuff. And really, when that comes down to port colleagues in the room, that's really looking at what am I doing around shoreside electrification. Where in the UK, I sit across all the UK free ports. I sit between UK government and the free ports right across the UK. Where's the right place in the UK for UK PLC to be bunkering ammonia? Where's the right place for it to be bunkering e-methanol? What can we electrify in shipping? What about the offshore wind vessels that are going out there? What's going to be their energy source in the future? All of that does still need to be worked out, and that's where we really need to be putting in real effort today to think about how we build that for tomorrow. Similarly, for airport colleagues in the room, sort of like, I'm all right, I've got SAF, it's a drop-in solution, no infrastructure change. Whew. Really? What I'm seeing in the networking across the industry is if SAF comes in, you're getting airlines going straight to the fence of the producers and investing in production plants and taking the molecules straight from there, cutting out the energy industry. You're seeing KLM starting building blending plants and blending their own fuels and bringing it in. So even where it is a drop-in replacement, there is absolute revolution going on and disruption going on right across the energy industry. And that's before we do get to the hard bit for aviation, which we're seeing Scotland move in first, which I'll talk to in a little minute. But hydrogen will eventually come. Maybe not for all big aircraft, maybe not this side of 2050, but it will. I sit in the DFT's Zero Emissions Flight Infrastructure Standards Advisory Board, the aptly named ZEFI-SAG, which is completely opaque to anyone. But it basically means if you understand fuel handling standards today and you understand why, from a safety case, they are where they are, how the heck are we ever going to get hydrogen in airports, and what are we going to have to do to the infrastructure to make it happen? Which is revolutionising, which is quite exciting from an engineer's perspective. But that's what floats and flies, so back to Amy for the rest of it, which goes on land.
Some similar themes. So, I mean, I guess the crossover in aviation being airports, who not only have to deal with SAF challenges that we talked about, but also electrification substantially of both landside and airside. So what is electrification happening in the wider economy going to do to their infrastructure, their need for infrastructure, their need for network connection, for example. So there's some kind of complex engineering issues going on around that. And then, obviously, in road, we have the hydrogen BEV battle happening as well, depending on which vehicle class you're talking about. So there are some choices to be made there, and there are some different speeds of technology maturation that we're seeing. And that's before you even get into, when we say battery, which type of battery and how long will those different technologies take to mature. So lots of very significant technology challenges to be overcome. I think just moving from there onto the right-hand side of the slide, I mean, again, multimodal integration maximizes the operational and carbon efficiency of the end-to-end passenger journey is possibly the most consulting headline of a slide that I've written for quite some time. So I thought we'd just maybe bring that to life a little bit with maybe a couple of examples. So So I guess what we're highlighting is a couple of things. There are big, significant things that need to be overcome across all of those modes and across all of the different technology vectors that we've talked about. So that's from, there is always a substantial infrastructure investment required, whether that is building an entirely new value chain based on hydrogen, whether it's rolling out sufficient charging infrastructure for EVs, whether it's thinking about fueling stations. There is big infrastructure capital to be deployed across all of those issues, and that takes time, and clearly there are kind of economic factors at play in the macroeconomy. The travel, the behaviours that we talked about is partly about public awareness of carbon, as we talked about, but also about how consumers perceive of their participation in the system itself. And then finally, this final point I think is one that's kind of interesting when we talk to our corporate clients, because these changes take decades. We've talked about the last 30 years in energy. So thinking from a business perspective around how you plan for that change for infrastructure that is going to be in place for the next 30, 40, 50 years, much of which is uncertain, as we said, kind of requires some different behaviours, some different capabilities within organisations. But look, back to the headline, an example of how this plays out in the kind of work that we do with clients, and I'll talk about something which is probably simple but hopefully kind of quite powerful. A lot of the work that I do day to day is working with large corporates who have huge fleets of petrol vehicles. Most of them want to switch them to BEV, usually in service of their own net zero corporate commitments. And we often start with talking about batteries and different models of cars and availability and total cost of ownership and the carbon footprint of each vehicle. But actually where we try and pull it back to is the first thing from an efficiency perspective is to figure out whether you need all of the cars that you have or all of the vehicles that you have, or whether actually planning more efficiently across your entire business means that you can take out carbon by simply taking out a number of vehicles. So start with a kind of very kind of crunchy operational question. The second thing we then do is say, well, if you think about the cost of travel to your business, then you give people an allowance and they get a car, and then you have loads of expenses for different types of travel mode. How about if you replace that with something which gives people a carbon footprint or a number of carbon points, a number of miles to travel, and provide that in a way which is managed, routed on a maximally efficient basis, which could include things like in urban areas, last mile, access to last mile technologies like microscooters, to integrating with public transport. We've had some conversations with some of the large rideshare companies who will do a corporate SLA for jumping in an Uber to get from meeting to meeting, for example. And why not integrate that with air miles? Why not integrate that with intercontinental rail travel as well? So thinking about how you maximize the efficiency of a journey across multi-modes and providing that to end consumers in a way that makes it easy for them to do their job and not hit the bottom line, in this case of a corporate, is a lens that we try to bring to some of these challenges. So again, that's what we mean by multimodal integration, blah, blah, blah. I hope that that's one of many examples. So, conscious of time, I'm just going to do a couple of quick summaries and then hands to Kim for the Scottish perspective. So, hopefully, some of that has resonated with you in the room. We're very conscious this is a kind of broad audience with lots of different perspectives. But I think the takeaways would be the solution to decarbonising the transport sector is not going to be one size fits all. There are going to be multiple technologies for multiple uses for multiple sectors required, different levels of maturity and different challenges, and that's a very complicated path that we need to navigate through. To do that, we need to think in a holistic and integrated way rather than in a siloed way, whether that's a silo based on your part of the sector or a silo based on technology. And finally, don't forget the user. The end user is the tool, the often overlooked tool, to kind of help us get there faster. We've seen it in energy. I think we can do it in transport. Kim.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, when we seen the running order and I seen that Morna was on after me, I thought, I can't give up that opportunity. That's really exciting. Because as a proud and global Scot, I sat in a hydrogen panel in COP26 in Glasgow, my hometown, and we were talking about the opportunities. That was, nearly 3 years ago now? We were talking about the opportunities of small nations to harness first mover advantage. We've got the opportunity within this union that we've got small nations making up a greater one. And what I think is really exciting to see is that I am seeing how Scotland is starting to really move and lead in some of this space. I think we forget as well that actually Scotland's an archipelago. It's not just a mainland. And actually that unique topography of quite small journeys but where you have got a critical public service need to connect the islands to the mainland, mean that we've got an opportunity to be one of those early and first movers in some of that real bleeding edge technology that you're seeing that will revolutionise transport and create a real fair and just transition. So I've been so excited to see the announcement, I'm sure many of you did, that Loganair have agreed to buy the first hydrogen fuel cell plane from Cranfield. So that's Scotland using its position to buy UK tech. And I'm desperate to hear what Morna says about how we can do more of that stuff. So without further ado, thank you very much for listening to us, and we'll let go on to the next session.
Can I take that from you? Thank you very much indeed, Kim, Amy, thanks very much. We are going to scoot ahead. Yes, Kim's very excited, as am I, and all of you should be. Morna Cannon is with us next. She's the Low Carbon Economy Director at Transport Scotland. Some real innovation happening there. So I'm going to shut up, let Morna take over. And is it right that you travelled down this morning?
I did. And
no problems?
Transport system worked perfectly.
Hey!
So there you go.
Woo!
First time for everything.
And I will give you the ticker as
Thank
well.
you very much.
Take it away, Morna. Thank you very much.
How to follow that. Really fascinating start to proceedings, Kim and Amy. And I think a lot that really resonated with me. I'm here to give you guys hopefully a bit of insight as to how we're seeing this from a policy perspective in Scotland. And I think there are some really exciting opportunities that we've got in Scotland and some unique features that we can take advantage of. So keen to get under the surface of all of that. I will talk a little bit about who we are and what we're up to, size of the challenge, and then delve a little bit into some of the case studies of how we're approaching this in Scotland. And then I think crucially finish up with some reasons for optimism. So Transport Scotland, probably most of you are aware, but effectively an executive agency of the Scottish Government, a bit of a blend of sort of Highways England and then also some DFT-esque policy-making functions. Just as I'm the Director for Low Carbon Economy, just to emphasise, I guess, the scale of the challenge, the scale of the problem in Scotland. And I think we've touched on this already today from a national perspective, but one thing that always strikes me is this graph up here on the left as you look at it. That's Scotland's transport emissions over the last couple of decades, and you just see the absolute plunge in those during COVID. And I think it's quite instructional to think that what we need to do to get to where we're going is take that as red and then do it twice again by sort of 2030. That's going to be quite hard. We weren't moving around an awful lot during COVID. I think that really emphasises the scale of the challenge. And of course, transport emissions have bounced back a bit since then. So some really tough targets to meet there. And obviously Scotland has kind of gone further in its ambition. We want to reach net zero by 2045 ahead of 2050. So some real high aspirations there. And in terms of where those emissions are comprised from, most of the emissions from transport are still surface transport in Scotland, hence a lot of our focus there. I think there's some things that do make Scotland quite unique in terms of both the challenge and the opportunity, and I think just that point that Kim, you were making earlier around we're an archipelago, there's a lot of Scotland that is very rural. You probably can't make out the detail on that graph or the diagram on the left there, but a lot of that is dark green, and all of that is areas of the country that are classified as remote rural, which I don't actually think is a classification in England and Wales. So not a lot of population living there by comparison to the central belt, but clearly a lot of communities spread across the country and some in very difficult to reach places and connected by lifeline ferry services and lifeline rail. But equally, I think perhaps as a virtue of that remoteness, also some huge capacity and huge opportunities, particularly in the renewables space. I'm sure everyone's pretty well familiar with that. The scale of the ScotWind opportunity is massive. So massive that it's both an opportunity and basically an essential necessity for the hydrogen economy. You know, if we're going to get all of that energy away, we need to be turning some of it into hydrogen and looking at opportunities to export that as well as use it anywhere we can within the UK economy and indeed within the Scottish economy. So pretty exciting stuff by virtue of our uniqueness in Scotland. And I think another unique thing is just the approach that we're taking to policy making within Scotland on net zero transport. And there's 3 things I wanted to highlight here. I was interested in, I think, Amy, you'd mentioned we have to do net zero in a way that doesn't affect the economy, which as an amateur economist I like and agree with. But I think particularly the way that we're looking at that in Scotland is we need to do net zero in a way that doesn't detrimentally affect communities and people. That's our first core principle of policy making on net zero in Scotland, is that we have to do that in a way that promotes and preserves a just transition. So clearly a just transition is about approaching net zero in a way that creates sustainable, good, high quality jobs across the country and protects communities from an unequal distribution of costs associated with net zero. And that's, I think, quite a distinct feature. We've enshrined those principles in our climate change legislation. We've also established a Just Transition Commission. There's 12 Just Transition Commissioners who keep the Scottish Government's feet to the fire. They're an independent body and they hold us to account on how we're pursuing a just transition in Scotland. And I should say as well, just transition's not just an outcome, it's also a process. So we're very clear in everything that we do that we want to co-design it with the people of Scotland, with the communities of Scotland. I think the second thing that makes us unique to some extent in Scotland is that our national transport strategy really does recognise climate change as a core fundamental principle of what we're trying to achieve in the transport space. So climate change is one of our 4 key objectives of our national transport strategy. And I think maybe even more uniquely is this diagram on the right. It's the sustainable travel hierarchy. So we're very clear that moving to net zero is not going to be, it's not desirable to do that in a way that just replaces like for like petrol, diesel cars with electric vehicles, nor is it possible. If we did that, we wouldn't get to net zero quickly enough. We need to optimize the system, remove demand for petrol and diesel where we can as well. So we've got a sustainable travel hierarchy, which is a core principle. We want to shift, modal shift to active travel wherever that's possible and to public transport. And I should say it's a pretty politicised issue, I think, at the moment. We're very clear that that doesn't mean that there's a war on the motorist. We're very clear that lots of Scotland is really remote. There's lots of places where there's not really an alternative to private car use. That's fine, that's understood. But wherever it is possible, we want to shift away from private car use. I thought I would touch on sort of 3 main case studies of our approach so far. With apologies, I'll focus probably on surface transport. Apologies, Kim, not things that fly or are in the sea. But this is where the lion's share of the emissions are, and I think it's where we've done a lot of early stage intervention. The story on cars and vans, I think hopefully people will be reasonably familiar with, but the Scottish Government was really quite interventionist in this space from an early stage. So starting off in 2011, I think it was, we started putting public investment straight away ahead of need into the EV charging space. I think we've invested now over £65 million in the Charge Place Scotland national charging network. And as a result of that, we're proud to say that we've got the second highest number of charge points per head outside of London in the UK. And we also promoted for a long time that those charge points were available free of use to really encourage that uptake. We also were pretty interventionist on the planning side, so now legislation in place to make sure that all new developments have to include charge points and also that charge point installation, wherever possible, is a sort of permitted development right. So have been quite interventionist on planning as well. But we're recognising that it's time now, the market's mature enough that we need to get out of the way as government. There's a lot of investment there. We need, I think, we had research done for us that showed we need about £100 million of investment per annum in the charging network by 2030. There's no way that the public sector can fund that, and there's no need to. There's a lot of appetite to invest now. Consumers are moving to EVs in droves and will continue to do so, hopefully by virtue of the vehicle emission trading standard now, or scheme rather. So we need to back out of that market, get out of the way. We need to move away from a sort of public-dominated EV charging market, move away from Charge Place Scotland in the long term, not in the short term. And that's what our vision for EV charging sets out, and that's what our EV infrastructure fund is aiming to do. It's aiming to support local authorities to partner up with private sector investors and roll out electric vehicle charging in their areas. We're making good headway with that. Almost all Scottish local authorities have now got submitted to us a strategy and expansion plan for EV infrastructure in their areas. And we're working with them to make sure that that private investment is spread sort of fairly and in line with a just transition. And we've also been encouraging local authorities to make sure that charging is no longer free, but is set tariffs for that are set at a sort of commercial rate, so that we're not undercutting the private market. And as a result of that, we are seeing private investment now really flowing into the charging market in Scotland, which is great. But as I said at the start, just transition is really fundamental to how we want to do all of net zero in Scotland. So although we want to move to a more privatised market in charging, we know we need to protect and support consumers, and especially harder to reach parts of the consumer market with that transition. So we've historically spent upwards of, I think, £200 million on our low carbon transport loan, which is an interest-free loan for the purchase of EVs. We have also spent a lot of money in grants for community transport organisations to purchase zero-emission vehicles as well, and just making sure that everybody's got fair access to the new technology that's coming through. Second case study I'll touch on quickly is buses, and here again we've been really conscious of the need to do things collaboratively, and I think that's part of, again, our unique approach. We established a bus decarbonisation task force, bringing in the finance sector, manufacturers, bus operators, and we really looked at trying to figure out jointly what were the barriers, and also jointly what were the actions that we could all take around the table to get us to net zero in relation to buses. And we published a decarbonisation pathway a couple of years ago, and in parallel with that, the Scottish Government's been really interventionist in providing grant support for bus operators to decarbonise their fleets. I think we've got just touching maybe 600 zero-emission buses in Scotland now as a result of that intervention. There is a recent round of grant support there, the ScotZeb 2 fund, which I can't say too much about because we're in the final stages of bid assessment and hope to announce the results of that competition fairly soon. But we're really encouraging their different business models and understanding how to move away from a system where public subsidy is required to get to net zero to one where the private sector is collaborating in different and new ways, whether it's shared infrastructure, whether it's leasing assets rather than owning outright, and also looking to encourage collaboration between large operators and SMEs and community organisations as well. Lastly, we want to learn the lessons of how we've approached buses and translate that into HGVs and how we look at the truck challenge. We have a zero-emission truck task force. They're also looking at a pathway which should be published hopefully very soon. Keep your eyes out this month. And I think critically through this work, it's really highlighting the points that we touched on earlier, I think, around viewing this as a system. Okay, we're a lot of the time as policymakers, maybe as operators, you look at things in your sort of modal silos, but there's a huge need for shared infrastructure here that needs to be thought about jointly. And I think one of the really exciting things that's coming out of the task force is this thing on the right, which is a national map, effectively, of refuelling and recharging needs for HGVs in Scotland. My hope is that we can use that as a platform to start to draw infrastructure needs more broadly across various different transport modes and figure out what are the synergies there and what are the opportunities for sort of co-investment in a national, whether it's a national hydrogen refueling network or a national high-powered charging network. I think there's a clear need to work together cross-modally and as a system to build and invest in that. And again, that's an open mapping exercise at the moment. If anybody's interested in that, really happy to discuss it. We're looking to have a first stab at that mapping work and publish it in the coming months and engage with utilities about the investments required. I'll conclude maybe just by talking about summarising the key challenges, a bit of personal perspective on this. I think freight, particularly the challenges here are, well, international, certainly, and indeed span across all of the UK. So we're looking at infrastructure requirements in Scotland, but that's not really a lens, I guess, that a lot of transport operators themselves confine themselves to, certainly not in the freight world, and so there is a need for ongoing close collaboration between Scotland and the rest of the UK when we think about the infrastructure requirements for getting to net zero in that part of the transport system. Secondly, my team might kill me for throwing this out here, but I think I'm really interested in the sort of demand-side regulatory policy measures that I think we might need in order to properly stimulate into the hydrogen into the transport network. It's great that the UK government's got the hydrogen production business model. I think where I often hear is that there's maybe a bit of a gap in between that and then what it would take to get hydrogen into some of the demand sectors. So that's an area of personal interest for me. I think there's limits to where Scotland can go with some of that work, and I think it does need kind of cross discussion across all of the UK. From a passenger perspective, I think again it's back to that just transition point, getting as many EV charge points as we can, the right charge points in the right place, and making sure that spread of investment is equitable and isn't leaving some consumers behind. And then equally, the rollout of EVs themselves, making sure that that's not unfair, that we're paying attention to the sustainable travel hierarchy, but we're also supporting people to replace their vehicles where they're necessary, and making sure that it's not just wealthy Tesla owners who have the nice opportunity to drive an EV, but that everybody gets a chance. And keeping that confidence up, which I think is so critical still in this stage that we're at with technology adoption. And lastly, I think that confidence point relates to my reasons to be optimistic, which personally I feel in dire need of at the moment. It's quite a gloomy situation, let's say, a gloomy start to 2024. Never that good fun reading the headlines in the mornings, is it? But I am really encouraged, I think, by public attitudes on the net zero challenge. We publish every year a Scottish household survey, and in December 2023 it threw up this, which I thought was really interesting. The percentage of Scottish population that sees this as an immediate and urgent problem is increasing. And I think really interestingly, perhaps a bit, this highlights some of my own internalised bias, that's not just in the kind of younger generations, that was within the older population as well. People over the age of 75 were increasingly seeing this as a really important, urgent challenge. I guess there's maybe a tendency in the media to sometimes see climate change as a sort of young person's issue, spearheaded by people like Greta Thunberg, but I think everybody is now really on board with seeing this as a big challenge that they want policymakers like myself and my team to address, which is really encouraging for us. It's also encouraging that I think most adults were saying they roughly know what it is they need to do. So there's so much in here that is that's down to buy-in and down to collaboration and getting everybody on board with the challenge. And I actually, on the train down, had a look at what the stats were for the rest of the UK, and similarly encouraging. I think most people now seeing this as an urgent issue, an urgent global threat, and still with time to act, which I think is really encouraging. And I think critically, from a UK level, the polling seems to show that people still believe that the costs of inaction are greater than the costs of action, which I think is really critical for us as policymakers, and indeed businesses and third sector actors across the economy. People want us to act on this. They want us to be ambitious. They expect us to act. They expect us to collaborate. And I think it's great to be here, and it's great to learn from everybody in the room and understand how we can go further in that partnership and how we can all challenge ourselves and hold each other accountable to move in the way that people want us to move. I'll finish with our strapline. This is our campaign in Scotland. We've got a campaign called Scotland Let's Do Net Zero, which is really a call to arms for the whole of the country, and I think it's a nice way to finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you very much indeed, Mona. Some great innovations, lots of interventions there, and really encouraging presentation, so thanks a lot. We are going to move quickly into our panel session to find out what our panellists are doing to this end. So, first of all, Andy Brown, Group Corporate Affairs Director, Manchester Airports Group. If you can take the furthest seat for me. Get yourself some water as well. Annette Smith, Technical Director, Mott MacDonald. Thank you. Take the seat next to Andy. Richard Ballantyne, Chief Executive, British Ports. Thank you. Grab yourself some water. Andy Clark, we meet again, Integrated Transport Director, Costain. Thank you. Andrew Cruddington, Climate Change Associate, CIHT. Great. That is everyone, is it not? Just get some water.
There you go, mate.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask you each in turn, real quick, as the headlines, where you are on the journey towards decarbonisation. So, Andy, if we can start with you, Manchester Airports Group.
Yeah, I'll keep it really quick. For those of you who don't know MAG, we're the UK's largest airports group. We own and operate Manchester Airport just down the road, as well as East Midlands Airport and London Stansted. Normally, when you tell people you work for an airport company, they say one or two of two things. Do you get free flights? And the answer to that is sadly no, because I work for an airport, not an airline. And then the second one is a version of, depending on how much they like you, how do you live with yourself when you're contributing in such a bad way to the climate crisis? And a lot of the answer to that second point is that the industry as a whole is genuinely prioritizing and committed to decarbonisation in a way that it wasn't not that long ago. And there is a proper plan for that. So from a MAG perspective, obviously, we are directly focused on our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and that's a lot easier to do. We have a plan to get there by 2038. What am I talking about there? It's all of the energy and heating required for our terminal buildings, but also all of the equipment on the ground, not just how people drive around the airport environment, but ground handling equipment, electric tugs, all of that sort of stuff. But then clearly we can't ignore the Scope 3. How do you put lots of tons of metal up in the sky? And what's really encouraging there is that only a few years ago, the whole of the UK industry came together to commit to a detailed plan for how to get to net zero by 2050. That was a world-leading piece of work. UK got there first in that commitment. Since then, everyone else around the world has come on board with that, so we can take some pride in leading that. I'll be very quick. What's in that plan? 4 pillars. The first one, lots of this overlaps with what Kim was saying earlier, by the way, which is encouraging to hear. The first one is all about new aircraft technology, the hydrogen planes, the electric planes, investing now in something that won't come online for 20 or 30 years, but we need to do the R&D now to get there. The second one is about what we call airspace modernisation, optimising how we move aircraft through the sky. The movement of planes over the UK at the moment is sort of a spaghetti junction mess, and you wouldn't be surprised that sending them round and round in stacks is not very efficient in terms of carbon usage. The third one is a recognition that we are not going to get to zero emission. We talked earlier about net zero versus zero. We're not going to get to that by 2050. So there needs to be decent investment in carbon removal technology to offset whatever's left in terms of carbon usage. And then the fourth one, which is the hottest topic, the most urgent, is about sustainable fuels. A recognition, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this in more detail later, but a recognition that we need that molecule. The energy density is not there in other technologies. Yeah. And that's what is the near-term opportunity, the drop-in technology, and we need to be investing now in the production of the sustainable fuels to meet all the targets we have. So there is that plan. I guess the main takeaway for me is there is that detailed plan, but the challenge for us is two things really. Convincing people who are skeptical about the idea of whether you can ever achieve net zero in aviation. And then secondly, making sure that when we get there, because we will get there by 2050, but when we get there, that the benefits of that decarbonisation are here in the UK and not realised somewhere else. All of the new jobs, new technology, new economic pillars, that we have a stake in that here and we're not just importing it from elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Just need to get everybody in so that we can go back around again. Thank you very much. Annette, then, so where do you see yourselves, clients, on this decarbonisation journey?
Hi everyone, so I'm Head of Future Mobility at Mott MacDonald, and for the last 5 years I've worked with the Department for Transport as their futures advisor, helping them to kind of understand what the long-term uncertainties are and how they can improve their decision making. But before that, for the last kind of 20 years, I have worked on local transport plans. I've worked in sustainable transport, and I've kind of very much been in the area of travel behaviour change. And so kind of thinking about user carbon. And so I guess for lots of us in the room, probably decarbonising transport isn't a new thing. It's actually something that we've been doing for the last kind of 20, 30 years. And I'm just really keen now, in the kind of stage of my career that I'm in, is to make sure that we're building on that work that we've been doing to date. We've got a really good platform. We've been really successful at running some great kind of behaviour change programs. And I just wondered, how many of you were, can put your hand up and say, I'm aware of the sustainable travel towns work that we did in this country, and some of you are smiling, but and also the local sustainable transport fund. We've been really good. All that stuff was monitored. All that stuff we learnt lessons from. All that stuff was actually had really big successes. And I think when I was working on all that stuff back 10, 15 years ago, the peak of kind of innovation was when we could map everybody's postcodes in a geospatial way, and that was amazing. Whereas now I knew that we were going to be heading towards kind of this world where we've got better data, better digital, where we'll be able to understand people more. And so what I'd love us to see, and what we're working with our clients on, is kind of bringing that together, that kind of good foundation that we've got with digital and data. And I think really, as Morna was saying, the time is now. It kind of frustrates me a little bit that 15 years ago I was trying to sell ice to Eskimos and saying, can you get in, can you think about public transport? Whereas now people are actually wanting to understand how they can make those actions to kind of help in the kind of climate change battle that we're in. And I think so. Therefore, in that sense, I need to, just kind of make sure that we aren't suffering from a kind of a state of shared memory loss of a profession. Let's remember the things that we've done in the past. One of my colleagues talks about decarbonising transport as it's like a marathon of sprints. And, we need to be running really fast. And so I kind of wanted to think today about how this is actually, we're in a relay and we need to be running really fast, accelerating transport decarbonisation, but passing on the baton to citizens, to our colleagues, to the political decision makers.
Annette, I just need to jump in, just because we are a lot shorter on time than we would like. So I want to get through everyone's kind of headlines as to where they are in the journey. So can I zip those? Because I want to get to questions and questions from the floor. Literally 20 minutes is not going to do it, but thank you so much thus far. Richard, British ports.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So you want me to be quick? You don't want me to do 45 slides on our journey in the port sector?
There are going to be a lot of angry people
missing
the final address, and a lot of angry people who can't get next door.
Well, just
for the closing,
to waste 30 seconds, full sympathy here. My wife is ex-cabin crew, and we got asked all the time, do you get free flights? I said, no, you get a discount, but you're bottom of the queue, and you get a partner who earns bugger all. That's how I'd summarise the thing. Anyway, it was good fun for while it lasted for anyway. So just moving over, so ports and harbours and shipping, maritime. We had Chris Sherling-Rook on the stage earlier, talked about where we are in the logistic chain. We're a bit weird compared to a lot of other parts of transport. We are part of transport, but it's not really us that move. We're stable bits of infrastructure that can provide those gateways for whether it's ships or trucks, etc., to collect freight, rail, and train carriages, etc. Now, we can do quite a lot, and we've moved on a lot from, I think I talked previous event about the old carbon trust assessments. You used to come in and say, put little notes saying turn off the lights or adapt to LED bulbs, etc., to make yourself more efficient. We've moved on much more now. We're looking at things like plant machinery, cranes, etc., electrifying them. We've got a few asks around that, though, but perhaps we'll come to that in the debate.
We will. Yeah.
And I suppose the main thing that Chris touched on is we are private sector. We're market-led. We're not national. Although we might be critical infrastructure, we're not nationally owned. Yeah. So that means we've got to make it work financially. There's got to be a business case. Yeah. And it's all well and good. Morna did a great presentation there, and the predecessors were talking about let's have things like shore power at ports, which we are doing. There is, we're quite ahead of the game actually compared to other sectors. But there's got to be a business case.
Yeah.
We need our customers to want to pay for that.
Yeah.
You're looking
Absolutely.
with those eyes that we need to move on.
I absolutely am, but thank you. I take that on board. Andy, then, Costain, in terms of what you're doing in terms of helping customers.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, so from a Costain perspective, we've sort of moved from the what and the why to now the how. And I think from an organisation that spends a lot of time designing and building engineering infrastructure, the best thing to decarbonise is to do nothing, build nothing. But actually, as we've heard earlier, you know, the energy resilience, we've talked about social value, we've talked about climate change, we've talked about ageing assets. Building nothing is not an option. So how do we then build, you know, regenerate our assets and infrastructure in a smart way? How do we adopt the new technologies? And one thing that we've realised, we cannot do it on our own. Right? There's no one organisation out there who can help, you know, who's got the magic bullet for decarbonisation. Right, so one thing we've done in Costain is we've leaned in heavily with the British Aviation Group and with Hydrogen Southwest to how do we work collaboratively with cross-industry in helping to drive that. And, you know, when we're looking at the likes of Hydrogen Southwest, we're working closely with aviation, with maritime, with land transport, and how do we decarbonise fleets. And the predecessors talked about fleet decarbonisation, and how do we bring organisations together to help look at the fleets. So a good example, we're now helping clients not just to do assessments of their current fleets, and you can't just do a swap out from diesel or petrol to battery technology, because clients have spent years honing their operational vehicle fleets and how they operate, and how do they go back to base, or do they the drivers take them home? How are they going to manage their fleets with alternative energy sources? So we're helping them with that, and then we're looking at the depots. How do you store them? Because you can't just pack a load of buses and a load of dust refuge collections into the shortest, smallest space possible if they contain a lot of batteries. We've just seen at Luton the consequences of lots of batteries close together. So it's just looking at actually how do we redesign the new infrastructure of tomorrow to accommodate the decarbonisation needs.
Thank you, Andy. Andrew, you've been super patient. Yeah, I mean, obviously you're CIHT, so Highways and Transportation. What do you know of who you're supporting around what they are doing, how far they are in their decarbonisation journey?
Yeah, so I was going to actually, if it's okay, just say a little bit about what we're doing, if
Sure.
that's okay. So we are a professional institution, so we've got a slightly different role to everybody on the panel, but I think there's sort of two parts of the kind of ecosystem that we're probably important and have been touched on already. The first, I think it was Amy or possibly somebody else mentioned carbon literacy earlier. We're the kind of training qualifying body for the profession. We think it's very important that we get everybody up to a basic standard of carbon literacy very quickly and then move on in a specialist area. So we've been doing quite a lot in that space. Some of that's just simply about using the levers we do have. We've got requirements in all members, like in all professions, to do your continuing professional development every year. We audit a proportion of those records and those plans, and where people aren't looking at their decarbonisation needs, we're going back to them and trying to support them in going forward. We've created some basic carbon literacy training that's free to all members, and we've licensed it to some of our corporate partners as well. Big challenge there is getting beyond that basic level of making sure everyone is speaking the same language and has a basic understanding, and into the kind of more specialist areas, because we've talked a lot about the system earlier. A big part of the system is the fact we're quite a diverse community, quite a diverse profession, lots of different disciplines. How do we support those different disciplines get to where they need to be? One thing we're trying to do, pushing out an open door a little bit, working with the Welsh Government, who, as most of you probably know, have been very ambitious. They've moved the transport portfolio into the Climate Change Ministry. So with the other professional institutions in Wales, we're running a series of webinars, discussions, just to explore in different parts of the puzzle what the skills requirements are, how we can do things differently. I'll do a quick plug if anyone's around on the 12th of March and wants to talk about modal shift and actually getting beyond just simply setting targets and into delivery and some of the skills required for that. There's a session that's about Wales but open to all on the 12th online. So that the kind of skills piece is, I think, where we fit in. And then the second area is classic professional institution stuff. Just being a learned society, pompous 19th century word for helping people overcome their collective problems. Next session is called something like Scaling Up What is Practically Possible. I can't read my own handwriting. But one thing we've been focusing on in the last year is we've got a group of 20 or 30 of our corporate partners, Costain are involved, Mott's are involved. We know we haven't got time to reinvent the wheel on every project. We've got to stand behind things that we all collectively believe are credible and have got some numbers behind them. So we've been getting that group together a couple of times a year, sharing the project, sharing the data, peer reviewing each other's work. We published some of that in a report that came out last year called Reducing Emissions by 63% in a Decade. Have to work on those titles, sorry about that. That work's continuing. We're going to keep pushing bunches of case studies out during the course of the year, bunches of guidance out. If anyone whose organisation is not involved in that wants to get involved, get in touch, because I think that's exactly what we're here for. We're a kind of convening body, helping people pool and share information. One last thing to say. My brother works in the ticket office at Taunton Station, railway station. He gets free travel, so it's a modal thing.
Wrong.
It's a modal thing you've got to go for.
You're talking about the skills gap there, Andrew. I mean, is it a large gap of people needing to be really brought up to speed, or is it a real problem at the moment?
I mean, I'd be interested in what the others have to say, because I'm almost seeing this sort of secondhand, because I'm one step removed. But the kind of feedback I get is that there's a significant proportion for whom even basic carbon literacy is a problem. So that's where we focused in the last 18 months. So just things like, what is the difference between net zero and carbon neutrality? What does scope 1, scope 2 and 3 even mean? Because if you can't speak the same language, you can't be talking about the same things, it's going to be very difficult. Now, not everybody needs to go that much further than beyond that, perhaps, but again, interesting what others have to say, but we need to get to that space first. Yeah. I can't give you a number saying, it's 45% of people who are literate, but I think there's a basic issue there.
Thank you. So in other sessions, we talked about the role of tech and data. Is there anything outstanding around what you're doing in terms of urgency, need to have that at the heart of moving towards decarbonisation in harnessing tech and data to its best?
Well, I guess I'd say that tech, you can't have decarbonisation of aviation without tech and data. All those 4 pillars that I talked through that are the core of the decarbonisation plan all rely on either tech and or data. There's all sorts of optimisation projects that we and other airports are doing about how to make the handling of aircraft on the ground really, really optimised, to what Kim and Amy were talking about earlier of getting that really slick before you try and make the transition more fundamentally. But I take solace from the fact that some of the really intimidating, significant technological change that you need to achieve that fundamental net zero by 2050 is well on track, A, and B, is something that the UK is really good at. Particularly aerospace is one of the sort of underpinning sectors of the UK economy. So we are leading the charge on that. We just need to be realistic that it won't bite for another 25 years. So what's our transition technology to get us there?
Sure.
And that's where you get into sustainable fuels.
Sure. Annette?
Yeah, I think on a user perspective as well, we're beginning to see digital really being used in terms of being able to help people make decisions. Things like mobility as a service. So Transport Scotland are doing quite a lot of work in that space. There's been some work on. It's worth sort of having a look at. There's a piece of work called Rail Plus Club, which was an app that enabled rail users to use an app and encourage them to switch from car to rail, but they were also able to be incentivised in that. So it kind of goes to that twin transition piece that
Kim was talking about. Yeah. Great. Richard, in terms of data tech, is that the heart of everything?
And I don't want to sound like a Luddite, and it's absolutely essential for improving efficiencies to assess what you're doing, and similar with airports, getting ships in a more efficient manner and getting containers or cargo in and out the port gate is absolutely essential. But we've kind of done that. We're pretty efficient as it is already. What we're looking at now is quite sort of big heavy things, whether it's, I mentioned electrifying plant and machinery, getting that access to the grid capability so we can electrify our operations and actually provide electricity for our customers and users. I think that's probably where I'd focus things on. Data, there's absolutely right. I don't want to kind of rule that out, and there certainly will be opportunities to be even more efficient with what you do. But we're at a stage now where we're looking at power sources and things like that. So it's pretty fundamental stuff.
Yeah. Any barriers that your clients are talking about in terms of making sure that they can use data as part of that twin transitioning, Andy?
I think from our point of view, there's a lot of data out there, and data is essential to help make better decisions. I think a lot of clients have got too much data, and how do we then turn that into information that we can then make a better decision? So I think there's sort of opportunities there on how do we filter data better. But going back to sort of the technology, I think in order to help decarbonise, there's a massive opportunity in the tech space. I'm not talking the digital side, I'm just thinking more around, so we were looking at a couple of years ago around how do you refuel a hydrogen aircraft. So to make the business case work for a turnaround of a hydrogen aircraft, you've got to, I think EasyJet, Ryanair work to 25 to 35 minutes turnaround. How do you fill enough hydrogen into that aircraft? And in order to do that, you are going to end up lifting some pretty heavy 50 to 100 kilo sort of pipes into the aircraft, which today are done by humans. In the future, that is not possible. So some of the technology we need is the automation and the mechanicalization of to enable these greener energy fuels to be used needs to be developed. Yeah. And that's where a massive opportunity for UK PLC.
Thank you. Let me just check. I have got a little bit of time. Anybody want to ask any questions here before I head to the last question? No? All good? Oh, what? Yes? Yep, hang on a moment. Got a microphone for you. Okay, so yeah, what's your name? Where are you from?
Hi, I'm Warwick from PA Consulting. Hi, great to see all the engagement this afternoon. Quick question is, all of this change, there's a lot of engineering solutions and technology solutions, but what about the people? What, in closing, maybe what your one tip that you've learned in your organisations for how you take the people with you on that journey?
Good question. Who wants to answer? Give it a try. Andy, looks like you...
That's a really good question. Interestingly, I don't think there's enough people. I mean, I'm just looking at hydrogen. I sat on a skills panel for hydrogen experts that we need to accommodate, even just for the land transport and aviation industry. And in the southwest alone, they're looking at 100,000 people. And, we just don't have them. So there's a massive, I would turn it into an opportunity for the generations coming through, for existing people who want to transition into some of the skill sets, because this is not just hydrogen in terms of looking at the tech, it's hydrogen for the ground handlers or for those who are, driving the trucks around or with hydrogen on the. It's a completely different operation, and they need to be re-skilled in handling and the safety aspects around handling the new fuels. So I think there's a massive opportunity, and it's going to need more people than we've currently got in the UK. So I think that's what we need to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just answer from a perspective of how you bring the consumers with you? So there's lots of polling about consumers' attitudes towards the carbon impact of travel, and I obviously look at the aviation side of things. And the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, does a particularly good survey every year. And the latest results from that show that people really do care about and understand the impact, so they don't need a lot of teaching about how bad or not aviation is. But really interestingly, this year they were asking questions about who the consumers think should shoulder the burden of the cost and decision making on that decarbonisation, and very clearly consumers saying, we don't want to have to worry about it. Can you just do it for us, please? And ideally pay for it. Now, I don't think they fully understand that anything that government or the industry pays for will end up flowing through into the cost that they pay. Yeah. But we have products that we work with. Everyone else in the sector has their own products of like carbon offsetting, for example, and you see very small uptake of that, but huge appetite from consumers to have those emissions dealt with. So I think, without sort of dismissing your question altogether, because it's a really good question, is like, actually, I think the answer is they just want to be brought on that journey without having to think about it, which goes back to what Kerry was saying in the previous session, I think, about the challenge of behaviour change, is just, if possible, don't give people that challenge, sort it for them in a way that's as painless as possible, really. Great.
Andrew?
I just wonder if there's something about learning from other sort of successful public awareness campaigns. So this is not one of mine. This is from Glenn Lyons, who's one of your Annette's colleagues at Mott MacDonald's, and he's a professor at UWE. But Glenn's view, and I think I agree with him, is that there isn't really any credible pathway to net zero that doesn't run through reducing the actual gross car kilometres. We're going to have to drive less, but that's a pretty difficult sell, or it has been. It descends pretty quickly into sort of conspiracy theories about 15-minute cities and anti-car rhetoric. Glenn's view is, look at things like Meat-Free Monday, veganry, where the message has been pretty much around, you can have 80% of what you've been doing up to now, and you'll get some benefit, and you'll get some benefits as well. You can do eat meat 5 to 6 days a week, but you'll feel better, you'll be doing something for the planet. Perhaps there's something about that in the kind of in the way where we message about the transition. You can have 80% of your previous journeys, but you can have cleaner air, better future for your children. Because it probably needs to be quite simple. I'm a bit of a wonk, I'm a bit of a technocrat. I'll make this far too complicated. We need someone to get some simple messages across.
Yeah, Car-Free Friday.
Car-Free Friday.
How are you going to benefit from Car-Free
I mean,
Friday?
it won't solve everything, but it's a start. Yeah. That kind of simple messaging has to be a start.
Fantastic. Panel, I think we're going to have to leave it there because dangerously close to time. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Please give a round of applause to our panel. Thank you. And guys, do you want to take a seat back here? Just going to have one more presentation for you as we wrap up this session for the day. And our final contribution is where we're going to look at an astonishing example of carbon reduction in the infrastructure construction stage and how collaboration really is key to realising the art of the possible. And obviously we have been talking a lot about collaboration today. So please welcome to the stage Martin Riley, Senior Vice President for Climate Performance at CRH, although some of you here might know him as Martin from Tarmac, is that right? Martin, come on up. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, and welcome. As you said, Martin Riley, CRH, formerly the Chief Executive of Tarmac in the UK, which is part of the CRH group, so that's right, Martin from Tarmac, hopefully. So a lot today has been discussed already around climate and the huge impact on asset management, not just from a resilience perspective, but more from the decarbonisation space, which is where we're going to focus on the conversations today. The challenge for transport asset owners clearly is how to hit their net zero ambitions, and most of our major clients and organisations have already published their 2030 and 2040 targets and are really looking for us to support them in achieving their ambitions. So these are some of the questions that we are asked as a key member of their support teams and or supply chain. What can we do to help reduce the process in manufacturing and installing our products, so the installed carbon, which most of us now would recognise through the EPDs. Can we produce and or develop longer lasting materials? So in other words, enhance the durability of the products and or enhance clearly the performance of the asset. Can we provide smoother roads then that require less carbon intensity for the road users to reduce the operational carbon? And then can we provide the integrated technology that allows us to both record and enhance productivity and use that data to go forward? So one thing, and I think it was said in the previous presentation, we clearly recognises that we can't achieve decarbonisation on our own as a global organisation or as an organisation that operates in the UK. So we see our role clearly as a coordinator of our supply partners to develop those new technologies to bring to our clients. Partnership is the new leadership is the mantra of one of our key partners, Volvo, and we'll show in the video hopefully how we pull that together. So we see our role to help pilot new technologies and to carry out full-scale trials with those new technologies and to demonstrate and prove that those technologies really do decarbonise. We were very fortunate to find a client, an organisation client, Stockton and Hartlepool Council, who were determined to help prove out these technologies in their ambition to hit their net zero. So we set ourselves a challenge. How near to net zero could we actually achieve? And if I click this, hopefully we'll have a video which hopefully shows us the Rock to Road journey that we went on. Hopefully you enjoy that. So what did we achieve? I think you picked it up on the bottom side. We actually, by putting our whole supply chain together with our strategic partners, driving hard new technologies, everything there was prototype, so that was one of a kind. We reduced the carbon on a traditional road by over 80%. So we got virtually in touching distance of net zero. Obviously the challenge we've got now is how to scale that out. But I think what we wanted to bring to the forum today is that we are focusing hard on bringing new technologies into pilots and or demonstrating, as this slide shows, that we can clearly deliver against some of the objectives that we've been set by our clients. So as you see there, smoothness, we have already delivered the smoothest road pavement in the world last year. Longer lasting roads, we already delivered a durable road surface which is 20% enhancing versus traditional road pavements, and that was put down in Hartlepool last year. Carbon reduction, you've just seen the work at Stockton where we reduced the carbon intensity of the installed pavement by over 80%. And then with integrated technology, we're already driving digital construction, showing huge construction improvements using digital construction. So we have proven results. We can actually deliver an awful of what the challenges are that our clients and customers are facing in their net zero challenge. We continue to push as Tarmac and CRH, and we've set up our own CRH Ventures division, and if anybody wants to Google CRH Ventures, you'll see that our latest accelerator is called roads of the future. So we're actively going to the market to find new technologies, new startups where we can help support them, to support us, to support you, our clients, to find a route to net zero. So I guess my finishing comment here was to really leave with kind of two questions. And I know that these are two questions that have been bouncing around the majority of today, so I'm sorry I can't give answers, but I think it's important that we as a sector find the answers. We've shown that we can deliver pilots, we've shown that we can prototype, we've shown that we can work with our supply chains, we've shown that we've got partners that are willing to support us, global partners like Shell, Volvo, and the others that you saw on the clip there. The question we have is, how can we help you to scale this technology to make it real everywhere? And then I think the one which probably is most poignant, and I know has been mentioned in virtually all of the forums that I've been fortunate to sit in today, is how do we get commercial alignment with the green premium? In other words, how can we actually motivate innovation from organizations like ourselves? So that was what I wanted to give you in the time that I had. Hopefully that's to time. I don't know if there's any kind of questions that you wish to aim.
I've got one for you actually, Martin. In terms of getting some of those projects to work, what was the lead time in that? Because, building those collaborations with those partners, how arduous was it to get to the points where this happened?
I think there's two parts to the question now. One is that every member of our supply chain and our global partners were delighted to be involved and were delighted to prove out their technologies with us. Yeah. The time that it takes for us really is to find a client brave enough to have the pilot on their network. And thanks to the guys at Stockton and Hartlepool, they were the ones that took the perceived risk from their end to help them to understand how easy or difficult it was going to be for them to hit the net zero targets that they've challenged themselves with. So it probably took us 6 months to put the project together, but that was more around the availability of the network than it was the partners. And probably the third component was because everything you saw on there was prototype, then kind of clearly it does take time to pull that together because they are one-offs.
Yes.
And obviously the challenge now is how we scale that up.
Yeah, great, thank you. So there's the will there, there's the desire
Absolutely.
there. It's about getting the time and the space, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed,
Thank you.
Martin.
Thank you.
Really interesting presentation. Thanks, Martin, for us. Thank you. Really fascinating that. I'm excited to see how it is possible to scale up some of those projects. Right, wrapping up the day then. Just want to thank Costain for sponsoring the theatre today and to PA who sponsored the decarbonisation session. You'll be excited to know that there are drinks in the exhibition hall. You might still be able to catch the Google AI announcement, but at 5:30, in about 15 minutes or so, the closing keynote with Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester. That's it from me for now. I'll be back 9:30 tomorrow in the keynote stage as well. I hope you have a lovely evening. I hope you are back tomorrow. And if you're not, safe journey home. Thank you.